And so begins the great downfall of our time. That is an actual thing that someone wrote with regards to the recent Skyrim mod paywall, but more on that in a minute. Since its release in 2011, Skyrim has become one of the most popular games ever made. It sold 20 million copies by the end of 2014, and since its release has become a flagship title for modding. People have modified Skyrim on PC to have better graphics, more realistic looking water, new characters, better looking characters, which, because it's the internet focused on boobs and ass physics, they've improved combat, added survival elements, new quests and storylines, all complete with professional voice acting. It's pretty impressive, but it does beg the question, is Skyrim even Skyrim anymore? Can a game that has undergone so many changes be considered the same game that was released back in 2011? Not to mention that all of those changes were unofficial changes. They weren't made by Bethesda, the people who developed the game in the first place. Over the past week, there's been some huge controversy surrounding the game, and I mean huge in terms of things that don't really matter, like whether or not there's a black stormtrooper in the new Star Wars movie. Basically, Valve, the company that runs the very popular PC gaming site Steam, has instituted paid mods for Skyrim. Now, modders, if they opt in, can get 25% of a sale of their mod, rather than just all the mods being free. As you can imagine, everyone freaked the fuck out. The whole thing was just a mess. It seemed like it started out with good intentions, but it was just terribly executed. The general sentiment was that modders create mods because they love the game, not to get paid, and this new paid system brought in a series of terrible mods made by people just in it for the money. It got even worse when people started selling mods that used other mods that they didn't create or have permission to use. It's all a super gray area in copyright, kind of like graffiti. If Banksy graffitis a wall and that owner turns around, cuts out the wall and sells it, is it really his to sell? Well, it's his wall and Banksy had no right to graffiti on it, right? But it's Banksy's intellectual property. With modding, they're modifying someone else's work that they don't own or really have any right to. And now that company is turning around and saying, hey, if you want to charge people to use and look at your art that you created out of our art, we'll give you a cut, but only if you want. In this age of no one buying anything like they used to and people making new free content for 4-year-old games, it's no wonder someone tried to make that profitable. In a few days, 133,000 people signed a petition to have the paid system removed from the site, and it worked. Valve and Bethesda decided that they were spending more money responding to angry fans than the system itself was generating. You can't get young people to vote, but if you change anything about their video games, they show up in droves. With that in mind, is Skyrim really still Skyrim? How much change can be made to an original piece of art before it's no longer considered that original piece of art anymore? Or does some art exist on a continuum, open to change and interpretation by different people? George Lucas created but also ruined Star Wars, and he did so way before the prequels. The original trilogy has been re-edited in every single one of its releases because Lucas believes that a film is never finished and that the audience should always be subject to the director's ever-changing vision. This bears more of a resemblance to the fan edit of Star Wars that removed all the non-original special effects. I talked about that in a previous episode, which you should watch. You'll like it, I promise. Dicks. Like HBO today, they were everywhere in ancient Greek and Roman art. That is, until the Roman Empire converted to Christianity, at which point they became more like NBC, covering crotches with conveniently placed objects, in this case, fig leaves. The Renaissance and the 1500s would see the Council of Trent ban nudity in art and alter a number of paintings and statues that were on display in churches and other public places. They would cover crotches by adding branches from nearby bushes, or in the case of most statues, just add cheap physics-defying fig leaves. This is less relevant, but to make them fit, they would hack the penises off, which were all very small for some reason, and I would love to know if there's a horrifying bucket somewhere filled with tiny stone dicks. You know, for science. Statues like the David had fig leaves added on post-creation without the explicit permission of the artist. While this is less drastic than adding supersized bouncy boobs to Skyrim characters, the principle is the same. Is the David really the David anymore, or is his penis implicit to his being? Upon completing the coronation of Napoleon in 1807, Jacques-Louis David was commissioned to make a replica, which he did from memory, which is astonishing because it's 20 by 33 feet and features dozens of people. The replica is very close, aside from the color tone, which may have come from the scanning process, but if you look very closely, you'll notice some stark differences, like different hair colors, or people looking in slightly different directions, or people's hair looking way more coiffed in the new one. It's a fun game of spot the difference. This replica isn't an original piece of art, but rather it builds upon the original, intentionally or unintentionally. unintentionally. Speaking of replicas, there have been many depictions of the famous scene in the Bible of Judith beheading Holofernes, each more gruesome and emotional than the last, and the latest incarnation is on an organic food company's soup can. The paintings tell the story of Judith, a beautiful widow who Holofernes, a general sent to destroy her city, attempts to seduce. He gets really drunk and falls asleep, and Judith decapitates him to save her city. Depictions of her started out very innocent, but over time grew more sexualized and way more violent. Does each recreation of this piece of art change its meaning, or are the different emotions represented just set dressing on a core story? Meaning is easily lost through translation. Musicals, books, games all lose something when they're translated for a different medium. But does this mean that they're not the same idea? This would mean that Game of Thrones, the TV show, is a different artistic idea than the books, which I'm not sure that it is. Yes, it is different in the same vein as the Coronation of Napoleon, but the core ideas remain the same. With Skyrim, mods add on new storylines, characters, and visual updates, among other things, in a somewhat similar fashion to the Game of Thrones adaptation. So maybe for once, George Lucas is right. Maybe art does exist on a continuum, up for interpretation and change by different people while still retaining its original core idea. What do you guys think? Do all the mods to Skyrim make Skyrim a different game, or is it just the same game with a different interpretation? What do you think about the whole paid mod clusterfuck? Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, be sure to click right on my face to subscribe, or at least think about it.